Good afternoon, everyone,
Whatever happens.
and welcome to today's seminar. My name is Preston McGuirk, and I'm a graduate student in the Education Policy program here at UVA. This talk is part of the Education Policy Seminar Series sponsored by the Bankert Fund for Political Economy and is co-sponsored by the Batten School Research Speaker Series as well as the Department of Economics. Today we're delighted to welcome Dr. David Deming. David is a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School and the Harvard Graduate School of Education, the director of the Harvard Inequality and Social Policy Program, and a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. His research focuses broadly on the economics of skill development, education, and labor markets. He's currently serving as a co-editor of the AEJ Applied and is a principal investigator, along with Raj Chetty and John Friedman, at the CLIMB Initiative, an organization that seeks to study and improve the role of higher education in social mobility. He recently won the David N. Kershaw Prize, which is awarded biannually to scholars who have made distinguished contributions to the field of public policy and management and are under the age of 40.
Not anymore.
Finally, and most recently, he was named the faculty director of the Kennedy School's Malcolm Weiner Center for Social Policy. Dr. Deming will be talking for approximately 90 minutes today. Please note that any additional or personalized questions after about 1:30 p.m. can be addressed to Dr. Deming via email, as other meetings for him will begin at that time. This is the last talk of the semester, so we'll hope you'll come see us next semester for more talks. But now, please join me in welcoming Dr. David Deming.
Thank you, Preston. Thanks everybody for coming. It's great to be here. I've been back to UVA several times over the years, and I always enjoy it. It's always good to be back. So this is a paper about STEM jobs, and it's joint work with Kadeem Narey, who is a second-year doctoral student at the Kennedy School, and was actually project started quite a while ago, and one of our most excellent research assistants is sitting there in the room. That's Sushi Akmanchi right back there, who's now a first-year doctoral student in the econ program. So thank you also, Sushi, for your work on this project. Maybe it's exciting for you to see it come to fruition. Maybe you're just tired of it and you want this to end. Okay, so I think I could motivate this project in two, I guess, somewhat distinct ways. One is in relationship to the economics literature and the long history in economics of studying how technology affects returns to skills and affects the nature of work. And another one is a kind of education policy-oriented motivation about what some people think of as the STEM crisis, or do we have a STEM crisis? And the essential issue is, why is it that these careers are so high-paying and we think that they're so important for economic growth and for the health of regions, and yet we can't get enough people to graduate in STEM degrees and so forth. So this is kind of, do we have a STEM crisis, policy motivation. So I want to talk about both of those separately. So let's start with the econ-related motivation. So again, as I said, economists have for a long time tried to study how technology affects work and how it affects what we should be learning in school, right? And the kind of dominant, I would say, canonical theory in this space is something called skill-biased technological change. It's sort of a mouthful, so we'll just call it SBTC for short. What does that mean? Well, if you think about the phrase skill-biased and technological change, what it means is as new developments occur in the economy, as work changes because of technological developments like artificial intelligence, for example, but going back farther, things like electricity or indoor plumbing, or steam power, like all these, computers and the information technology revolution. All these things were technological developments that really changed what was possible on the job. And a big thing that we do in economics, especially in labor economics, is study how those affect returns to skills. The reason we call it skill bias is because economists generally have thought that when change happens, it tends to favor people who are more highly educated or who are more skilled. So skill biased technological change. So change happens in a way that favors the educated. And the story and kind of the mathematical models imply that when we see this technological change, it's going to increase wages for everybody because everyone's going to get more productive. But it's going to increase wages relatively more for people who have higher levels of skill, thus skill bias, right? So this theory is, like I said, sort of canonical in economics. The primary evidence for it is actually quite macro. And when I say macro, what do I mean? It's that we observe over a long period of time in the US and in other countries, we can observe changes in the college wage premium, that is the relative return, so how much you earn if you have a college degree relative to how much people earn if they don't. So what's the premium earnings premium for having a degree, or in even much earlier periods, the premium for having a high school degree relative to not. Right? So we look at that premium, and then we also, the other thing, we can observe that. We can sort of estimate relative wages for education groups. And then we can also observe relative supply, meaning how many people out there have college degrees relative to those that don't. And what's tended to happen, especially in the US, but in many other developed countries, and especially since around the 1980s, is we've seen both of those things increase. So we've seen the returns to college increase, and also the number of people, as a share of all people working, the number who have college degrees has increased. Okay? And so if you think about this from an economics perspective, we all know supply and demand, right? So draw the two lines, demand and supply. Correcting myself there. The college wage premium in this simple model with measure is the equilibrium point between the two. And supply is upward sloping, and we think about, well, when there's more supply, so more college graduates, all else equal, that's going to shift the supply curve out, which is actually going to reduce the college wage premium. And yet the one thing we don't observe in this equation is demand. And so if what you see empirically, relative supply increasing, and yet the equilibrium point, the wage premium, also increasing, that means that demand, by implication, it means demand is increasing faster than supply. Okay? And so that is the canonical framework when we think that technological change is skill bias. We essentially look at the data and we say, well, if we have a lot more college graduates, but they're still earning more, that must mean that the demand for them is racing ahead of the supply of them. Okay? And that's the basic evidence underpinning skill bias technological change. And as many, this is not the dominant, this is the canonical view in some quarters of economics, but not the only one. And I think one very legitimate criticism of this is advanced most prominently by Card Denardo, but many others, is this is kind of inferential evidence. We don't actually observe technology changing skills directly. We're just kind of assuming this based on this high-level model and this macro evidence. Card and Denardo call this the technology tautology, and they're very critical. I think it's right that we don't have direct evidence of how technology is affecting labor markets. And the other important thing to remember is this is viewing education in a very reductive way. So more education equals more skill equals you can produce more widgets per hour. So therefore you're going to earn more. Right? And it doesn't really take into account the very nature of education. What are you learning in school? What jobs are you doing? How does that interface with your pay? It's just a very black box idea of how education and technology affect it. So I think, so you might say, well, if this is all you have, it's not that much. And that's right. But on the other hand, we have this kind of micro evidence, what economists call insider econometrics, was really just econ speak for case studies, of technological change affecting work in very detailed settings that is very consistent with this broad theory. So for one example is this paper by Bartel, Wisniewski, and Shaw, where they go inside a valve manufacturing plant, which used to have a technology, the way they produced, the way they did their job was they'd have workers with these big tools who would manually cut the valves. This is for industrial settings. And so the important skill there was physical, in a way. You had to cut the valves correctly and do it a lot and not make mistakes. And then they had this technology come in, computer numerically controlled machines that actually cut the valves for you. And instead, the job goes from cutting yourself to being able to program a machine quickly so that you create these small custom jobs. It's a really productive way to cut. You make very few mistakes. So what happened was firms wanted these very specialized products. They would make these small batch orders with rapid cycle change, and you have to kind of coordinate with your fellow workers, figure out how you're going to program the machines, and logistically how you're going to coordinate everything on the shop floor to produce the most valves per hour, so to speak. So that really changed the nature of the job in ways that complemented people with higher levels of skill and encouraged more teamwork among employees and so forth. And then you have another case study, this is Aurelie and Renee, looking at how the organization of a bank changed when we went from the primary job within a bank of reading checks manually and figuring out what people were writing in the check and writing it in the ledger and making it all add up, to having electronic character recognition that did all that for you. And then you had kind of customer-oriented banking where you followed certain accounts and you realized people were strategically bouncing their checks because they didn't have enough money, and you have to figure that out. So it's much more problem-solving oriented. And so we know at a micro level that these technologies have huge impacts on work. So we know at some level that this theory has to be true, and the evidence for it is really quite macro. Okay, so that's where we're stepping in this project, is we're going to study the impact of a set of technology-driven changes in the skill content of work, to the extent that technology is manifested in changing job tasks. and we're going to look at how this affects the labor market returns to a form of specific human capital, which is degrees in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. Where you're learning something quite specific for a specific set of jobs, we're going to look at how those jobs changed, and then that's going to give us a sense of how it changes the returns to skills. So we're kind of step into that level between the broad macro and the very micro case study evidence. Okay. And the way we're going to do that is use job vacancy data from a company called Burning Glass Technologies, and I'll tell you about that. And we're actually going to compute the change in occupational skill requirements over a decade. So if you have the job of software developer, or electrical engineer, or college professor, how do the skills and tasks associated with that job change over a decade? Some jobs look pretty much the same, and some change quite a lot. And so we'll calculate measures of change, and I'll show you some intuition for those measures. And I'll show you that STEM jobs change faster, and that's both because new skills that weren't previously required start to appear. And a lot of it is things like, artificial intelligence, machine learning type stuff, but not all of it. That's a small share of it, but that's a thing that's in the news a lot, so you can see that in the data. That they're requiring you to know how to do things that weren't around a decade earlier. And then also things become obsolete. So one example is Adobe Flash is it's something that people used to use to program apps on iPhones, and then Apple stopped carrying it, and everybody stopped using it. So you see in the data that was something that was commonly asked of for software developers. You have to know Adobe Flash, and then in 2017 that was no longer true. Okay, so that's another. So that's not just about new skills; it's also obsolescence as well. And then we're going to kind of feed that into I hesitate to call it a model, a conceptual framework where people make forward-looking decisions about what field of study they're going to choose, and then the implied career path. And essentially the intuition for this is that if you choose to, let's say, major in engineering at a particular point in time, you are choosing a skill set to learn at that period of time. And that skill set may have a shelf life. We think about it as a vintage human capital, right? So you learned, this set of techniques, this set of software or whatever. And then the way we're going to think about this is in some jobs, so like in every year you stay on the job, most things you're doing you were also doing last year, but some things are new. There are some new job tasks in the production function. Okay? And when there are new job tasks, in order to keep doing the job, you have to learn those from scratch. You're getting better at the things that you were doing in the past, but the new things that appear on the job, you have to learn from scratch. And so what that means is you have a certain kind of vintage of skills that you learned in the past, and for jobs that are changing very rapidly, that skill, those set of tasks you learn, you don't accumulate knowledge for those because they disappear from the production function. And so basically, the skills you learned are going to have a short-run return because they're scarce, because the people who are older vintage in your career don't have them. But then your knowledge overall is going to depreciate more rapidly or become obsolete more rapidly in those fields because of this turnover. Okay, and that's the flavor of the model. It's not that complicated, really. And the main prediction is that jobs that have higher rates of change, so more new skills, more obsolescence, are going to have flatter age earnings profiles, flatter returns to tenure in the career, right? And that's both because you earn an initially high return, and because of obsolescence, what you learned in a past period is less likely to be relevant in a future period. And so essentially what's going to happen is the new workers in the same career as you are going to be better substitutes for you over time because they know the stuff that's current now. Okay? So that's going to lead to a difference in age earnings profiles across careers that have different rates of change. Okay? That's the main prediction. All right. So yeah, question.
What would be an example of this kind of job that you're talking about where someone their skills would become entirely obsolete with the change in technology that you're talking about? And how often do these changes in technologies happen?
So that's what I'm going to show you. I'll show you evidence of that. So
yeah, what kind of job?
So a lot of it is STEM jobs. So
what's a STEM job?
Science, technology, engineering, and math.
Oh, I know what STEM means. What do you mean by a STEM job?
Engineers, computer scientists.
Okay.
I will show you the actual job.
So you're saying that their job skills become obsolete in the change in technology? Aren't they responsible for developing that new technology?
Yes.
So why would their skills become obsolete?
Well, not all of them are developing.
Okay, let me be clear what I mean. When you go to college, you get a degree in engineering. Not everybody. Okay, so there's the mapping between what you learn in school and what you do on the job is much more precise for some majors than others. So if you major in economics, you go into a wide range of career paths. If you major in psychology, you go into a wide range of career paths. You major in engineering, you also go into a wide range of career paths, but many more people who major in engineering become engineers. And similar for computer science, you work in that field a lot. And you learn some stuff in school, okay? And if you look, for example, if you go to the computer science department course page in a place like, I don't know, I looked at Stanford because they archived them back to 2000. I don't know what UVA does. You can probably look, what are the courses they're offering? What are the things they're teaching? That changes over time. And it changes much more in some fields than others. So think about it conceptually as it's not just that if I'm a computer science major, what did I learn in school? Depends on when I got my degree. Computer science departments 15 years ago were not teaching you how to program in Python because Python did not exist 15 years ago. Okay, so the things you're learning in school are quite different in some fields than others over time, whereas other fields, like you're learning, if you're taking classes in English literature, let's say that you specialize in 19th century English literature, like sort of by definition you're learning the same thing over time because that's 19th century. So just let me finish. So
I want to ask this one thing, that you're assuming that once someone leaves the field with their degree that they don't continue to add on to their skill set.
I'm not assuming that.
Well, you just said that since Python didn't exist when someone graduated, that they don't have Python in their skill set.
They didn't learn it when they were in college. Now,
so it doesn't
well,
count.
let me just finish what I'm saying. So all that needs to be true is that it is slightly more difficult to learn things on the job than it is in school. So if it's the case that it is not costless, if it's costless to learn Python on the job, then you're right. Then you're right that if people can just pick up skills and not spend any time doing it, then you're right that it doesn't matter what you learn in what you learn in school and what you learn on the job. But I think the reason why you see things like coding boot camps and skills academies and these things kind of pop up is precisely because people like engineers and computer scientists know that they need to retrain themselves, but that it's also quite costly to do so while working a full-time job and doing everything else. And so what I'm going to show you is that these jobs do change more. And the test of whether this is true or not is whether we actually see people exit these careers over time at higher rates, and we do. Okay, so it is true as a fact about STEM jobs that people who start in them are much less likely to be in them 10 years later compared to other types of jobs. And my interpretation of that fact pattern is that it's hard to keep up with the current technology, and therefore some people exit over time. And I will show you evidence of that. So that's how, I'm not assuming that people don't learn anything. I'm saying this suggests that it might be harder to learn, it might be hard to learn on the job, and therefore we're going to generate some predictions for that and see if they're true. Yeah.
So I don't know if you're going to get into this. One thing that's interesting, this prediction about the flatter age earnings profiles makes perfect sense. The other kinds of jobs where we predict flat age earnings profiles are like unskilled jobs.
Yeah.
Are you going to get, so, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, observationally, I would think it would create some difficulty. Are you going to get into that?
Yeah, so I should be careful. So it's not flat, it's flatter.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there is a positive return. It's just basically what we're going to see is that if you major in, let's say, political science, you're, substantially behind engineering majors at age 24, but you're only a little bit behind them by age 35 or 40, and you may have even caught up to them. So earnings are increasing with age for everybody, but people with more general majors are going to get them faster. And so if you were to just compare like average earnings growth for STEM majors to unskilled workers, you would see much more growth for STEM majors, but you would see less growth for STEM majors than for non-STEM majors.
Is there also a prediction about inequality within each of these things? So in STEM, presumably because
Yeah.
the rate of technology is faster, it seems like it would also increase dispersion with it.
Yeah, you could. So you could have some predictions of it, but I think it would depend on what you assume about who can learn. So let me get into. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Like we're going to think about learning. Like we're going to take seriously the idea that people do learn on the job. But I mean, I think intuitively, so everybody's learning on the job, and actually we're going to make the assumption that some people learn faster than others. But it's, in a sense, like it's harder to learn on the job if things keep appearing that weren't in existence. And so think about it, it's all relative, right? So like if my job is manager, like I can learn how to be a better manager over time, and the more I do it, the better I get, the way we're thinking about it. But the basic technology of that job never changes. And so my opportunity to get even better at it every year just accumulates. Whereas if every year the job is essentially new, then I have to start over every year. And so in that sense, it's a comparison across careers. It's not that people don't learn. Okay. So, all right. So Now I want to talk a little about the policy motivation, which is the STEM crisis idea. So I'm just going to show you, there's many articles written basically every fall that are like this, where some newspaper like the Wall Street Journal says, look, how should you think about picking a major? Look at average earnings by major, and you notice that STEM degrees, and especially what I would call applied STEM degrees, which is like engineering and computer science, compared to things like biology and chemistry, have the highest average earnings. You'll notice here in bold it says annual wages of college graduates by major over a career. Turns out what they did was project that the Center for Education and the Workforce at Georgetown, they essentially took people's earnings in the ACS at age 27 or so and projected them forward 30 years, and it turns out you don't want to do that. I'll show you. But so we say, like, on the one hand, STEM graduates, and also they have STEM, so people who graduate in these STEM fields, especially applied STEM fields, not only earn the most, they also have the highest rates of employment. So it looks like that's the field you want to pick if you're just trying to maximize first job. Probably getting a first job and earning your first job. So the policy question is always like, these are such great jobs, why aren't more people majoring in STEM? And there's a lot of pipeline programs to increase representation in STEM and so forth. Okay? So it's kind of a puzzle, though, if you look at labor market data, because on the other hand, that's kind of how people do when they graduate. But if you look at the overall changes in the stock of STEM jobs over time, it doesn't look like STEM is expanding as a share of all jobs in the economy. It's actually shrinking a little bit. So this is from a recent paper of mine where I just calculated basically changes in employment share for different categories of jobs. These are professional jobs that the Census Bureau classifies as STEM. And in sort of categories, so computer science, programming, and technical support is one category. You can see that group of jobs increased by about 0.17 percentage points as a share of all jobs in the US economy between 2000 and 2012. That's what this figure is. So it's for each occupation category, what share of all jobs was it in 2000, what share was it in 2012? And so this, what 0.17 means is that maybe, if these jobs grew from 3 to 3.17% as a share of all jobs. So growth, very modest growth actually, for computer jobs. And if you look at engineers and engineering and science technicians and most STEM jobs, it's kind of zero or even shrinking. Right? So these got this field that is very remunerative, that has very high employment rates upon graduation, but it's actually not growing as a share of all jobs. And then if you look at other professional occupations that typically require a college degree but are not STEM, you see much more rapid growth there. This is the same axis, same scale. So what you see is actually much stronger growth in kind of non-STEM professional jobs like teachers, managers, nurses, health technicians, economists, college instructors, lawyers. So we're all going to be okay, I think. But what you see basically is it doesn't look like STEM jobs are kind of taking over the economy overall. And so it's sort of a puzzle to think, like, why is it such a good field for college graduates to go into, but it's not particularly growing? And if you looked at relative wage growth, it wouldn't be particularly strong either. So this leads, I think, this kind of puzzling set of facts and this kind of sometimes lack of conceptual clarity leads to this debates about whether we have a STEM crisis. So for example, Robert Charette, who is the head of a kind of a trade organization that works on STEM-related issues, says the STEM crisis is a myth. Forget the dire predictions of shortfall. It's really not a problem. And then Linda Rosen says the truth hurts. The STEM crisis is not a myth. It's a couple months later. And then the Chronicle of Higher Education organizes a symposium where everybody argues about it. STEM crisis, reality, or myth. And this is my favorite. The BLS has this monthly publication, the Monthly Labor Review, where they try to resolve it by saying STEM crisis or STEM surplus, yes or yes. Yes and yes. Right? And their point is that it depends on how you define STEM jobs. But the point, the overall point is that we don't really know what we're talking. My view is we don't really know what we're talking about here, and these kind of disparate set of facts makes it hard to reach a conclusion. And I think that's one way that we're contributing to this by observing that there's a difference between STEM skills and STEM workers. Okay, and so a restatement of the point I made earlier, but for policy purposes, to say, look, if you're a STEM graduate in one of these fields, you are earning high initial wages because you learned some skills that are very job relevant today. Right? So think about machine learning, for example, in computer science. There are other things, other kind of the latest software, but it's not just software, it's also a way of thinking that is being used in industry, okay, today. But that's going to change over time, and that's going to change especially in fields that are kind of near the innovation or technology frontier, right? Those are exactly the jobs that are innovating, and so things are changing for them. And so what that means is the things you learned in school are no longer being used on the job. And so that is human capital you've developed that is no longer useful. It's becoming obsolete, it's depreciating. Right? And you can learn new things, but that has a cost. And in some jobs you have to continually learn new things, and in some jobs you don't. Right? And so what you're going to see, this is all relative. So you see there's people who maybe get a STEM degree, and then they realize they have to constantly keep up, they don't want to do that anymore, some of them are going to exit the profession, especially when the returns to being in one of these fields decline over time. Right? So what I'll show you, for example, is people earn about, you can see on that Wall Street Journal figure, people are earning something like a 40% premium to being in a STEM field relative to a non-STEM field at labor market entry, and that declines pretty rapidly in the first decade of working life. All right? So when you're looking at this saying, I have to constantly retrain, I'm not earning that much more than somebody in other fields like management, and so what you see is a relative exit from the STEM workforce over time, and I'll show you that. Okay. And I'll show you that using a variety of data sources. The American Community Survey, the National Survey of College Graduates, the Current Population Survey, and then the NLSY, which allows you to follow people over time. It's a smaller sample, but these other ones are repeated cross-sections. You can follow people and control for things like academic aptitude. Okay, and I'm not going to show you every permutation of this, but it's, I just, you can read the paper if you want, take my word for it. This is pretty robust to looking at different samples, men versus women, or both, different definitions of STEM jobs, different periods of time, and so forth. So, first, before I show you the labor market stuff, I want to give you an intuition for the job testing. I should say, by the way, I'm pleased to take questions throughout. I feel weird if you don't ask questions for too long, so shoot. So first, I want to talk about the vacancy data. So what is this? This is, Burning Glass Technologies is a labor market analytics firm that scrapes the web for the actual text of job vacancies that are just online, all of them. So that includes aggregators like Monster.com and CareerBuilder. But they also go to the websites of individual companies. So they'll go to UVA's website and search, use a bot to basically search all the job postings and collect the actual text. Then they have a parsing algorithm they use that sorts the text into fields like education requirements, experience requirements, the name of the firm, the name of the job, where it's located, and then crucially for us, a series of job skills. Okay, and that ranges from very general, like teamwork, communication skills, problem solving, that kind of stuff, to very specific, like phlebotomy, commercial truck driver's license, SQL server, Python, very specific things too. Okay, so it really runs the gamut. There's something like 100,000 unique skills they did. All right, and so what we're going to do, so how do you take that 100,000 and make sense of it? I'm going to group some of the common skills into a bunch of categories using a classification that Lisa Klein and I created in a recent paper, where you group things like teamwork and communication into something called social skills, which is basically a way to make some sense out of the data, and also to make sure that we're not saying, hey, well, all the companies used to ask for teamwork, and now they're asking for communication and call that big change, when really it's just changes in buzzwords. Okay. So I'm going to do that, show you that, and then I'm going to look at the change over this decade, 2007 to 2017, adjusting for changes in the composition of the sample, because a big issue here is jobs are being posted online more than they used to be, and then also the descriptions are getting more specific for a variety of reasons. So we want to sort of account for that. So what I'm going to do basically is show you bar charts and where the underlying data is a vacancy level regression of the 2017 frequency of each skill, so the share of jobs in an occupation category that ask for the skill. Controlling for changes in education experience requirements, the number of skills, but then most importantly, occupation by labor market by firm or employer fixed effects. So we're going to say that what did Google, if Google posted a job for a software developer in Palo Alto in 2007, what did they ask for? And then how did that same set of job requirements change for Google in Palo Alto for a software developer over a decade? So we're going to kind of control away any new employers that come in, which maybe is over-controlling, because that's an important part of what's happening in the labor market, but I want to sort of convince you that this is not about the changing composition of data. This is like within firm, within labor market changes. Okay. All right. So what does it look like? Well, just to kind of give you an intuition, I'm going to start with what I would call changes in core skills. So this is, I call them core because they're sort of asked for in all kinds of jobs. So you can see one thing is social, I mentioned that before. And just to think about this, what this is showing you is for professional jobs that are not STEM, between 2000 and 2017, kind of within employer and firm, these firms are, in 2007, about 48% of them asked for something that we would call a social skill, things like teamwork and communication, and that increased to something like 55 or 56% in 2017. Right? And then for STEM jobs, you see a bigger increase actually over that period. So jobs are more likely to ask for these things, controlling for employers and labor markets than they were a decade ago. That's also true for what we'll call cognitive skills, which is like problem solving, analytical skills, research, things like that. And also, I'm calling it non-cognitive. I really don't like that term. I should change it. It's more like character. It's like, strong work ethic, dependable, self-starter. It's like keywords that employers use to say, like, do you care? We see that they want that more than they used to. And then finally, this is from a low base rate, but a big increase, especially in STEM jobs, the share of them saying they want employees to be creative. Now you might say, what does this really mean? They could just be saying this. How does it translate to job function? We don't really know. But I'm just showing you that this is happening in the data, and that it's pretty broad-based. However, when you drill down to particular occupation categories, we see patterns that I think, like the purpose of me showing you this is to reassure you these data have some actual content to them. It's not just random stuff in the job ads. So for example, it's also not perfect. So you see for management occupations, so these are occupation categories, 36% of the management occupations say they would like you to be a manager. They would like you to be a good manager. Like they use some term related to management. So it's not 100%, right? Because maybe they take for granted they don't need to ask you for managerial skills if the title of the job is manager, right? So, and in general, like anything that is not in the job ad, like we don't know about. And so the data are not perfect. But you'll notice that management jobs are twice as likely to ask you for managerial skills as any other category. So also there is some information in this. If you look at finance, you see most commonly required in business jobs and management jobs, right? Which is, I think, not so commonly required in kind of health care related jobs or social service, which is like guidance counselors and social workers and things like that. Customer service, most common in sales and administrative support jobs, 73% of them ask for that. And then office software is like basically Microsoft, Excel, PowerPoint, Word. And that's pretty ubiquitous. It's not particularly concentrated in some areas, but when it comes to more specific softwares, this ranges from like Python, SQL, Adobe Flash, Unix, all kinds of specific things. You see that the STEM jobs are much more likely to ask for those specific things. And that's going to actually turn out to be a key driver of what we'll find. Is both STEM jobs are more likely to require specific softwares, and those things change a lot. And just in terms of how you should think about this, if you see that a job requires some software 10 years later and didn't require software in 2017 and didn't in 2007, I don't think you want to take that literally as like the only thing that changed about the job was the software. A lot of times that stands in for other changes in job tests. So why are you asking for Python? Because you're thinking about the job differently as more big data applications and so forth. And we can't really measure all that. So think about the software as being sort of a proxy for more general change. That's how I think of it. Okay, so just to give you an even more specific example, we created a category of skills we're going to call machine learning and artificial intelligence. This is literally those words, but also things like convolutional neural networks, Bayesian nets. There's different things that are known to be, and then there's something like Apache Hadoop is a software package that's known to be used in a lot of machine learning applications. And you can see the share of STEM jobs asking for those things went from about 5% in 2007 to 17% in 2017, so more than tripled. And you see some growth here for the non-STEM jobs, so you can really see the difference here. So that's an example of something that's happening in our data that is real job change. And that's something that's, you wouldn't know if you're just looking at occupations or even job titles, but it's a real change in what employers want you to have. So that's the kind of thing that's operating under the surface in our data, yeah.
But here's, and maybe you don't have data granular enough to do this, but within STEM, it seems like there's probably a lot of heterogeneity in what this relationship even looks like. Are you able to dive into that? Or
yeah, definitely, yeah. So what I'm doing now is I'm sort of trying to, this is unfamiliar data to most people, so I'm sort of trying to convince you that this has what we think it has and that it's useful, and then I'm going to create a systematic measure of job change. I'm going to show you which jobs have the highest rates of change. And in that, then you can really look at the details. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So what about new skills? Well, again, this is just, maybe I'm belaboring the point. Maybe you think the data is great anyway. I don't have to belabor it, but I'm going to do it anyway. So what about new skills? So we defined a new skill as something that either literally didn't exist in 2007 or was really uncommon compared to 2017, and then old skills vice versa. These thresholds, 20x and 5x, are arbitrary. I can pick 15 or 30. It doesn't really matter. I just want to give you some intuition for the data. And what we can do is calculate by job category what share of job ads in 2017 required a skill that didn't exist a decade earlier. Okay. And on the flip side, what share of job ads in 2007 required a skill then that no longer existed in 2017? So think about this as like a measure of turnover. And what we see is by category, STEM jobs have the highest rate of turnover, so about 35% of all jobs in the broad category of STEM asked for a skill that didn't exist 10 years earlier. It's a pretty high rate of change. Compare that to social service, it's like, 5-7%.
And it's mostly software.
No, it's not. Well, it's more software than anything else, but it's not mostly. I think software is something like 15% of the total job change.
Do you think about the difference in old skills between skills that become obsolete or skills that become kind of implied? Like you might not need to say in Microsoft Office for a certain job today what you did.
Yeah, that's an important question. I mean, I think that that's going to be hard for us to account for when it's happening. I think that's one reason actually to focus on software, because software is quite, like you can say, in some sense, like what does it mean to say you want a good team player? It's sort of hard to know what that is, and it sort of could be cheap talk. But if you say, like, I need you to know, Python, it's like, you probably do need to know it to get the job. And so to me, that's the most reliable indicator, even if it's somewhat limited. Like, we don't want this paper to be just about software. So I guess a sort of black box way to answer the question is to say, if we calculate all this using only software, we get different numbers for our measures of job change, but the ordering of jobs doesn't change that much. So it looks like the jobs that have more software change also have more other types of change.
So this is like another thing you might think is if I'm a coder, right? Like in some sense, there's less room for learning because like I can just test you up front before I hire you and just say, oh yeah, you're proficient, come aboard.
Yeah.
And so in some sense, the returns to employer learning are sort of lower, and so that also sort of
your skills are more observable.
Yeah, exactly. And I can sort of screen you out easier.
Yeah, no, so I that could be true. I'm not aware of any direct evidence that's true, but it could be true. I think the question is, why are the jobs designed that way? Right? So you could sort of take it one level back and say, well, why is it that we have a job called coder that is easy to verify, whereas we don't have like a job in, let's say, business that's easy to verify? And I think one reason might actually be that these jobs are more dependent on a set of skills that are changing rapidly. Like when you have something concrete, you need people to know, and it's different than actually, I guess.
It amplifies what you.
Yeah, I guess you could say like one reason why this is true is actually a manifestation of this underlying phenomenon, which is these are jobs that are changing more rapidly. So yeah, I think it's a good point. And part of this return to experience that we're going to show you could be about differences in employer learning, but then I think you wouldn't see this too. So they sort of fit the two things together. They work together better than I just showed you the labor market data, I just showed you that. Okay, so turnover, more turnover for STEM jobs. And then the final thing I want to show you is how this varies by years of experience. So what we do is just estimate one of those holding the sample constant regression that I told you about earlier. And then we ask, what are the share of new skills required in both STEM and the non-STEM jobs by years of experience? So entry-level jobs versus jobs that also require you to have 10 years of experience. And the striking thing we see here is that about 35% of entry-level STEM jobs require you to have a new skill. That is a skill that was not around a decade before. But also 35% of jobs require you to have a new skill and 10 years of experience. So that literally means you have to have a skill that didn't exist when you went to school, most likely, right? Whereas if you compare it to non-STEM jobs, what you see is actually it's a lower base rate, but also there's some decline in the earlier years. So the entry-level employees are more likely to be asked for new things, and then that declines over time. And so I think an important question is, why are the jobs designed this way? But the fact is, what we see is a lot of these jobs, the ones out here, are asking you to have skills that you can't possibly have learned in school because they didn't exist when you were in school, and so you must have had to retrain yourself in order to keep the job. And that's something that appears to be concentrated in STEM much more than other fields. Okay. Yeah?
Does a manager of STEM people count as a STEM occupation
Yeah, good
or
question.
as a manager?
Yeah, so so in the census occupation codes, there are codes for natural sciences manager, computer science manager, engineering manager, and we code that as STEM.
Okay.
However, I think there's a lot of, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I think, because it's anyone who works with occupation data, it's a limitation. How do we get these occupations? Well, people just write them on a form, on a census form, tax form, you just write, what is your job? And I think with management, there's a lot of slippage in how that gets measured. Because like if you're a software developer, you've been working a couple of years and you start to manage a small team of people, do you call yourself a manager? There's a lot of management that happens in jobs where your title is not manager. And so I don't think I have any reason to believe that's unique to STEM. I think that's pretty common everywhere. But I just say like we don't know as much about people's occupations as we think we do. Yeah. Yeah.
So it seems like this is implicit if you're someone who needs to have 10 to 11 years experience and also have these new skills, that's going to be harder to find.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, any of the data was web scraped, do you also get a sense of how long the job descriptions were up on the website as like a proxy for how easy or difficult it was for them to fill it?
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't. Now, Burning Glass deduplicates the job posting, so if you post the same job repeatedly because you can't fill it, like they're not going to have it multiple times. But I don't have information on how long they've been posted. And it is true that there's some sample selection in the sense that jobs that stay unfilled are more likely to show up in the data. Which is why you have to be careful with counts of these things and why I'm not really measuring counts of job ads. I'm just looking at the average change in the composition of job ads, not saying like, oh, there's a lot of these versus less. Like, because I could say, well, look at the stock of jobs that are posted. There's a lot more of these compared to in other fields, but that would be hard to interpret for all the reasons you suggest. So, these data are very useful, but you have to really think carefully about what they're great for measuring what employers want, but they're not so great for measuring what employer to get, because you don't know who gets hired. So that's all just like describing the data. Now, how do we actually measure job change? So this is what we're going to do. There's a lot of ways to do this. This is not like appear to us, it's kind of divine vision. This is just one way to do it. We're going to, for each occupation, we're going to take all of the job skill requirements that ever appear, even if they appear once or none at all, like all of them basically, and create a share. So 40% of them ask for social skills, 10% of them ask for Python, whatever. Okay, and we're going to create a share for all those skills in 2007, create it again in 2017, and then take the absolute value of the difference for each and sum them up. Okay, so if a skill is ubiquitous in 2017 and never existed in 2007, that's 1 minus 0. Or vice versa, it's 0 minus 1, the absolute value of it. Think about that for intermediate cases and sum it up. And that gives you like a total measure of turnover of skills in a job. Now there's other ways to do this. We could divide by the skill frequency. We could weight it by a variety of things. We've done all those things to just test it. And it tends to change the numbers, but not the ordering of jobs, is my summary answer. Yeah?
Is this just, does it appear yes or no in the job ad, or is there some sort of normalization? Like, are job ads getting longer? Like they just ask for more things?
Yeah. So they are getting longer. And so we've done some things where we adjust for that. It's not, if it appears more than once, we're only counting it once. And that is particularly true for those umbrella terms, like the social skill thing one. Like if you say, I need someone who has great communication skills, who's a great team player, who really knows how to collaborate, that's 3 times you mention one of our keywords, and we're only going to count it once. And if you say the word, Stata 35 times in the job ad, we're only going to count it once.
Right. But
I don't know why you would say Stata 35 times.
Just in general, like, just thinking more like people just ask because they can ask, and the ads getting longer. Like one of the charts you showed earlier, like across non-STEM instances, it just seemed like everything was going up.
Yeah, that's right. Everything is going up. So I think I understand the question behind your question is how should we interpret these? Like I think cautiously, because we can sum up the job ads and we can sum up the skills in the job ads, but we can't have any sense of how they're weighted. So it could be that like you ask for 27 things, but you really care about 4 of them, and the other 23 are icing on the cake. And we have no ability to tell that. And so I don't want to overinterpret the data. What we're hoping is that, yeah, like some employers post things they really don't need, but if you see like economy-wide this trend in asking for some things more than others, that it's meaningful, even if some employers don't actually need it. That's kind of the assumption we're making. But I don't want to oversell it. Okay, so that's the measure. Now let's look at the jobs to answer the earlier question. So this is for 3-digit SOC codes, which are census occupation codes. What are the jobs that have the highest rates of change? And you see 7 out of the 10 are classified as STEM: engineers, physical scientists, life scientists. Computer is a broad category. We'll zoom in a second. And even the ones that are not STEM jobs, you can tell a story that actually is related to changes, especially in software. So for example, operations specialties is basically logistics. So the machine learning software that Amazon uses to figure out where they should send packages to which places in the country and how they can fulfill customer orders, that falls under this. Advertising, marketing, and sales is a lot of search engine optimization and marketing techniques, digital marketing techniques that are very software driven. And then financial specialists is a lot of software related to like, algorithmic trading and things like that. So they make sense, I think, broadly, in terms of measures of change. When you look at 6-digit, you can see that a lot of them are computer-related jobs. So computer programmers, software developers, and some engineering stuff. But all of these are STEM jobs. Now, jobs with the lowest rates of change are basically education and healthcare. And one cautionary note I want to make here is that you'll notice a lot of these jobs are jobs that have pretty well-developed licensing and certification regimes associated with them. So like you go to so for example, health diagnosing and treating practitioners is doctors and dentists. And it could be that if you count on, if you know that when people go to medical school, they're learning the latest techniques and learning the latest research on what treatments work, you don't need to put that in the job ad, like you know how to do this surgery, because you're counting on the medical school to do that for you. And so in job fields where there's a lot of training and certification, we're probably understating change, because firms are counting on educational institutions to do it for them. Okay, so just, I don't argue with my own results, but I think like it could be actually that the level of change, the rate of change is less in these jobs, truly, but part of it is probably also we're under-measuring it, yeah.
Do you have any sense as to why certain occupations or certain fields pay more than others, and do you think it's related to the amount of change in the technology?
Yeah, I'm going to show you that. That's sort of a specific prediction of the framework. Yeah.
It's just an observation, but these are also hard to offshore.
That's right. Yeah, they're sort of human jobs, human face-to-face jobs. That's right.
So you're measuring these changes based on the job ads and the differences in skills being required, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So right now, I haven't shown you anything about like what jobs people are actually in or pay or anything. This is just looking at the employer side. What do employers want? Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So let me just, I'm going to breeze through this. I just want to give you a sense of like, you know, economists like models, and I don't want you to take it too seriously. I just want you to think about this as like I'm taking a stand conceptually on what we think is going on. Okay. And so think about students making a choice about what field of study they're going to go into, and then an implied career path. So like everybody knows what's happening here. Everyone knows that in the way we're thinking about it, people know that some jobs have high rates of change. It's not a surprise that when you become a software developer, you're going to have to relearn things more. People are thinking about that as they're making their choices. And we're going to make this very simple assumption, which is that when you choose a field of study that's more technically oriented, it's going to pay off more, but it's going to be costly to study. Either costly meaning like either you have to study really hard and it's like cognitively demanding or whatever. So, and we're going to make this kind of assumption that people who are more prepared in school are going to have an easier time getting through that. Okay, and that's just simply to rationalize the well-known empirical finding that people who major in STEM fields kind of do better on the SAT and have higher grades coming into college. Okay, so they tend to pick more technical fields. Okay. And we're also going to allow for people to learn things on the job. That's actually really important to this set of predictions we're going to get. And we're just going to assume that those people who come into college with higher levels of aptitude are also going to be better at learning on the job. Okay, so if you're better at learning in school, you're better at learning on the job. It's learning regardless of the setting. Okay, and then we're going to define and measure the measures I showed you earlier, a career-specific rate of change. So you're going to choose a career knowing that some careers change faster than others. And literally what that's going to do in terms of the math is we're going to say in each year that you're in the job, some share of the things you have to do get replaced by new things. Okay. And that share is the rate of change. And so if you think of what's going to happen, the things that I have to do this year that I also had to do last year, I'm better at this year than I was last year. Right? So I've gotten better at that. And that's why you just see in almost every career, people get paid more as they spend more time in the job because they're getting better at the job. That's pretty common sense, I think. And so your productivity is going to increase with your gains in the things that you've always had to do. But it's going to decrease a little bit because of some new stuff that you have to learn from scratch. So again, like it's not that people don't learn, it's that they have to start over. So if you're a software developer and you have a set of things you're doing, all of a sudden there's this new software the firm wants you to use, you can learn it, it's just you're not as good at it as you are at the things you've been doing for years. That's all. Okay? And so what that means is you're going to have your productivity and your pay increasing at some rate that is a function of how much better you're getting at the things that you've always had to do and then how much you had to start over. Right? And you're kind of summing all those things together to get the total rate of increase. Okay? Yeah.
But you're not really throwing everything out that you've learned before, though. That's something that are you including that in your calculations? This idea, when you have someone with 10 years experience and whatever programming language they have is being replaced by another programming language, there are some definite similarities between the way things are handled by the machine.
Yeah.
And so because of that, they walk in at a higher level in terms of learning.
Yeah.
So it's not as if you would dump all that previous out. I mean, do you have some way of accounting for that?
Yeah, no, I don't know about counting, but I think the way we're thinking about that is that's okay. Like, you know, literally when we're thinking like some share of jobs, because you could conceptualize that different ways. You could say like, I'm using 5 programming languages and 1 we're not using anymore. Or you could say like, 80% of the knowledge I gained using programming language A can transfer to programming language B. And like in the data, that's kind of the same thing. So that, I mean, I think like what you're saying is totally consistent with this way of thinking. It's just a question of like how much knowledge transfers. And all we're really saying is in some jobs, more of it is constant in year to year than others for whatever reason. So in that sense, it's sort of a black box. Okay, so that's the kind of framework. And that gives us some predictions, which are you ought to have lower wage growth in careers that have higher rates of change. Why? Because you have to start over for more job tasks, basically. Okay, so in the extreme, think about a job that's completely new. You learned a set of things, you did it, the next year the job is totally different. You're starting from scratch. You haven't accumulated any learning gains for older job tasks. Whereas some jobs, nothing changes, you're just getting better and better over time. Okay? So lower wage growth in careers with higher rates of change. And then what that means is because people choose jobs not just based on earnings, but based on other things. Let's say you're a type of person who doesn't really love software jobs, but you take that job because you're going to earn a lot more money. As that advantage erodes, you might decide it's not worth it anymore and switch. Okay, and so we'll see, our prediction is that people will sort out of these careers at higher rates. So jobs that change faster will have people leaving them more as they age. And then this kind of baked in by assumption, but these technical fields are going to have higher starting wages, and people who are more prepared are going to sort into them after graduating. But the kind of least intuitive prediction is that they're also going to leave them faster. Okay, so people who are you know the highest flying achievers in colleges are going to choose the STEM careers, but they're also going to be the ones who leave for management, for example, earliest. And the reason that's true is because if you're a faster learner, you're a faster learner in every job, okay, not just STEM, every job. And so what that means is if you're in a job where the underlying production technology doesn't change at all, your advantage gets locked in even more over time. Right, so Preston has 1 standard deviation higher ability than me. Okay, he learns at a 1 standard deviation higher rate every period we're in the same job. Okay, if that job never changes, then his advantage after 1 year is this, and then it's this, and then it's this, because he's getting even better each year. So he's locking in more of his gains. But if the job changes every year, in the first year it's this, and then we're both starting from scratch, so then it's this, and then it's this, and then it's this. So it doesn't accumulate because we both have to start from scratch. So that's the intuition for why, actually, if you're in a job that changes a lot, you're going to see essentially people who are really good learners who say, actually, if I switch into management, I'm going to get really good at this job, and I'm going to earn even more over time than if I'm in a job that changes a lot, because then I have to keep up with the new graduates. And that's the intuition. And so you might say, well, that's kind of an unusual story. We're going to test it. We're going to show you that's true. That actually the higher ability people, people who score higher on the achievement test are more likely to leave STEM over time. Which I don't think is widely known. I think people know that, you know, the first fact, which is that people sort in, but not that they leave faster. Okay. So I think that this is like a nice prediction of our framework that is not consistent with others, and we can find pretty strong support for it. Okay. So just data now. So this is the rawest of the raw. It's just American Community Survey data weighted, no fancy statistical adjustment. And what I'm showing you is basically taking the pooled 2009 to 2016 ACS, which is when they started collecting the major data on college major, and it's just showing you people who major. This is all college graduates. It's just men. I'll tell you why it's just men in a second, not women. Things look decently consistent for women too, but the thing is, the ACS is repeated cross sections, and so people who are 50 years old and STEM majors in the ACS are people who went to college 25 years ago, and the selection of women into college, but especially the STEM degrees, has really changed a lot over time. So when we're comparing across rows, we're comparing really different people. Whereas for men, the sample is much more constant. So we're trying to show you the most consistent sample. In the paper, we have the results for women too. They're actually pretty similar. Okay, so but it's just men here in this table with at least a college degree, and we're going to split it into 3 categories: non-STEM majors, people who majored in what we call pure science, which is biology, chemistry, math, and physics, and then applied science, which is computer science and engineering. And then this is the average wages for people in each 2-year age category, and then the share of them who work in a STEM job. So not everybody who majors in STEM works in a STEM job. So what do you see? Well, if you compare earnings for non-STEM to applied science, what do you see? At age 24, people in computer science and engineering earning about $52,000 compared to about $36,000 in non-STEM majors. That's a relative return of $18,000 or about 50% at age 24, so pretty big. And then if you look at age 40, it's $12,000 more. So it's actually less in absolute terms, and in relative terms, it's much smaller. It's like a 12% return, right? So you can just see in the raw data that the relative earnings gain for being a STEM major declines very rapidly over time. And this is just for majors, regardless of what job they're in. It's just average earnings for people of that major. So it's kind of accounting for switching. And what we see is people who majored in applied STEM fields are just much less likely to be in a STEM job as they age. Okay. So a lot of this is driven by sorting out of those jobs. Yes?
So as we look at that, where would a job like math teacher be? Would that live in applied science here, or would that live in non-STEM?
So that's job. That's the job. This is by major. So if they're an education major, they'd be in non-STEM. The job of math teacher is not classified as a STEM job, but it could be. We could do that. But the Census Bureau does not classify it as a STEM job, so we don't classify it as a STEM job.
And the major, that's the confusing part, because here, for example, the major is both math and education to be a math teacher, so where that would live.
Well, so if people major
for teaching is not like cutting edge math.
Right, but I'm just trying to figure out where it would live.
Okay, so if people are majoring in math, they're in this category.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess the answer to your question is depends on how many of those teachers majored in math. If they all did, then they would all be in this category. Because
The people in that category can't teach.
what do you mean?
The pure science people are really horrible teachers.
Okay. That might be true. That might be true. But so the thing I want you to note about this is that it's not just science either. It's these particular majors, computer science and engineering, because you don't see this flatter profile in pure science. You just see it in this. And actually, these people are about twice as likely to go to graduate school compared to non-STEM majors. And non-STEM majors and applied science majors are equally likely to go to grad school.
Well, that's where you see that jump in pay, right?
Yeah, that's right.
The degrees right around there.
Yeah.
That's where they graduate with a PhD.
Or go to medical school.
So with the decline in the share for the applied science group,
Yeah.
so you're seeing a decline in the share in STEM. Where are they going?
They go into managerial jobs. But so do these people.
Right.
Everybody goes into management as they get older.
That's kind of
Myself included. Yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah, so I guess to that exact same point, like my naive perspective is that, especially in applied sciences, the only way to move up in a lot of those firms in which they're working is to go into managerial positions, which may not necessarily also be true for pure science. Is there some way that you try to account for I guess, like idiosyncratic hierarchical structures in these different firms?
I mean, I sort of think about that as not something to account for, but that's a manifestation of the phenomenon we're talking about. And the question is, why are the jobs designed that way? And like, if you happen to be in a field where you knew that the underlying job technology was changing a lot, that's exactly when you wouldn't design a career ladder. You would just say, well, I'm going to keep hiring the new grads because I know that those are the ones we really need. Like, so I think of sort of the job design as actually the phenomenon that we're explaining. Yeah, Sarah.
Sorry to hit on formal questions, but we're going to go for it anyway.
Okay.
So I'm trying to convince myself what I should do with the kid who, I don't know, is a chemistry, or well, is an engineering undergrad, goes and works for a couple of years and then goes and gets his MBA. The decision to get an MBA is clearly endogenous to where where you started out.
Yeah.
So at the same time, you expect to be hired on the basis, you expect your job choice to effectively be on the basis of your last degree, not your first degree.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure there's a question at the end of this. It's sort of an observation that leaves me puzzled as to should we really be classifying people by undergraduate majors, or should we be classifying them by their terminal degree, where a terminal MBA puts me in non-STEM.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, you understand why, we both understand why we think of that as an endogenous set of choices. But if I've got an MBA, I'm sort of kind of not, I mean, it's non, or a law degree or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly try to classify by the last degree. I think, let me answer the question instrumentally. I think we could do that. I think most graduate degree receipt is still pretty rare, and so I don't think that would really change the main story, partly because not a lot of these people actually go to grad school. But I think conceptually you're right, that it's really a question of like, I mean, okay, I don't really want, this is, I said it's a paper about STEM. It's not really about STEM, it's really about job change. And it turns out that STEM jobs change faster than non-STEM jobs. One thing I'll show you in a second is that actually when we measure job change directly, the non-STEM jobs that have high rates of change exhibit the same phenomenon of flatter wage growth. So in a sense, it's not about really like STEM is some kind of, you know, category that has a special meaning. It's just think about that as shorthand for a set of jobs that are changing more rapidly because they're on the technology frontier. And I think it's in general true that
but even with low, I mean, it's actually parallel to the low skill example where when people get sort of forced out of their manufacturing plant, we actually want to send them back to school.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so you could think of STEM like high-skilled vocational education. And that you have to understand that you're learning something that's really useful, but it has a shelf life. And that if you want to keep a job that's on that frontier, you need to go back and get retrained. Absolutely, yes. I totally agree with that. Even though you didn't say it, I did.
It's yours.
Okay, so now I just want to show you the regression-adjusted version of this where you control for stuff. Basically, this is a regression of log wages on 2-year age bins interacted with indicators for your major. And this is just showing you that at age 24, people who major in applied science earn about 40% more than people who the left-out category is non-STEM. And you can see that that declines by about half in the first decade of working life. Okay, so by age 35, they're earning about 20% more. So they're still doing, it's not, the lesson from this is not, don't major in STEM, it doesn't pay off. It does, it just pays off less a decade after you graduate than right away.
Because you're all managers.
Sorry, what?
You're all managers at this point.
Yeah, they're all managers, that's right. And so, I don't know the figure I should, but if I showed you basically a figure that showed sorting out of STEM, you'd see that decline in the earlier table. And if I showed you management, you'd see it's almost 1-for-1 replacement. By age 40 to 45, there's not a big difference in the occupational composition of college graduates by major. That's the bottom line. Okay. And moreover, another thing I'll show you in a second is that most of the return to majoring in STEM is kind of mediated by working in STEM. So once you control for what occupation you're in and things like your average academic aptitude, STEM majors don't earn any more than non-STEM majors in other types of jobs. Yeah?
I'm just curious if you've looked at impact on lifetime wealth.
No. This is where the data limitations are pretty severe. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like, in other words, maybe you had in mind if you earn more earlier, you can invest it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with like their behavioral changes and approaching that too. With younger people seeing the recession and then wanting to live either like a simpler life with lower expenses, or perhaps they're living with their parents and then they just decide to stay there and save up and. Yeah,
it's a good question.
That, like, generational difference and then lifetime.
Yeah, I don't have any data on it, but it's a good question. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you can distinguish your story from the compensating differential story. And here's the one I'm thinking about.
Okay.
You go into these STEM jobs, they're high skill, but the work's actually really boring. You do the same thing again and again. And, I mean, talk to computer programmers. You do the same thing again and again and again. So after you've done it for a couple of years, you know, it's just horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, for a lot.
Yeah. So I think that's part of the story, but the question is why do people go into it initially? Like it has to be
a lot.
But why does it pay a lot now and not later? Like the compensating differential would explain why people choose the field overall, but not why they choose it when they're young and leave it when they're old.
They're dumb. They don't realize what they're getting into.
Okay, so either everybody's irrational or we have,
I mean, you take programming in college, it's really interesting. You're doing all this new stuff. You're at the for people who go into it.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm just...
I think you're right. I think that explains exit from the profession, but I would say that it's the compensating differential combined with the declining returns to your skills that explains it. Because you still need to sort for the age pattern. That's my point.
Maybe the best people are maybe the best people who are leaving for other jobs.
Yeah, exactly. But
so you're cutting the people off the top, and so the average is decreasing because you keep cutting people off the top.
Well, no, because we're tracking people by major.
I know.
So you mean within major. I'm going to look at sorting by the best people in just a second. Yeah, and so there is some of that happening within major. It would have to be pretty, well, it would have to be pretty extreme to explain a 50% decline in the premium. It would be like, it would have to be pretty extreme to explain all of this. And I guess overall, what I'm showing you is like a collage of evidence that is consistent with the story that I think explains it best. It's not bulletproof. You know, this is actually not a causal paper. This is a descriptive paper. I'm proud of it. All right. So you might be interested in whether it varies by the type of degree. It's engineering, computer science shows the same pattern. And then another thing I can do is look at returns by occupation, not by major. Okay. And so this is asking the question whether STEM jobs pay relatively more to young people, regardless of their major. And there I can use more data sources because you don't need major in a lot of them. So this is different periods of time. The ACS is only since 2009. You can use the National Survey of College Graduates and then the CPS, which goes back like 40 years. And we see basically the same pattern in all three data sets, which is that STEM jobs pay relatively more to young workers, regardless of their major. Then you might say, well, is it the major or the job? Right? Is it something about the characteristics of people who major in STEM, or is it actually something about the job paying more to young people? And so for that, we can go back to the ACS and look at people who major in STEM but don't work in STEM, people who don't major in STEM but work in STEM, and then people who do both, and ask whether the patterns are, where the patterns are in these kind of off-diagonal cells. And when we do that, what we find is pretty striking, actually, which is that people who major in computer science or engineering but don't work in those fields, they do earn more than non-STEM majors. There's no declining return. There's no age pattern. Right? It's just a constant. It's this blue line. It's just a constant increase of about 15%. That could be because of differences in aptitude or whatever. But you don't see that flatter return due to tenure. However, people who major in something other than STEM but still work in STEM, we do see that. They do get paid more when they're young. Right? That's the green line. So we do see that declining premium, and it's kind of parallels, difference in degree, but it parallels the red line. Right? And so this shows that it's really about the job and not the major. It's not that people who happen to major in STEM are different in a way that makes them earn more than they're young, because when they go somewhere else, they don't. It's really the job that pays more when you're young. And then we can also, I don't have this in the paper, we also do that in the NLSY data where you can track individuals over time. We find the exact same pattern. Yeah.
Would there be any value in looking at, say, something like, say, social media? Something that's easy to learn, I would think, on the job compared to, so this is like in your non-STEM jobs, right? Where as just another way of looking at this, not like falsification, but just would it be consistent with your model? It's easier for me to pick up social media on the job, so I shouldn't see the same kind of profiles that I do with STEM, in which it's really hard to learn these things, and so you have this return for
yeah.
But then you have to take a stand on this is kind of a change in the job, but it's easy to learn on the job.
Well, so I don't know that easy to learn. I mean, actually, social media, digital marketing type stuff is one of the major categories of things that's not really STEM that we see a lot of change in. Okay. And we use that measure, and so jobs that use that a lot show up as changing faster. And then when we use that overall prediction, it does look like those jobs have flatter age earnings profiles. So it does look like there's maybe more salary inversion in jobs like that, which is also consistent with our framework. So maybe that doesn't speak to the question of whether digital media is harder or easier to learn than other things, but it suggests that as a new skill, it kind of fits into that overall category, even though it's not really about STEM. So it's a kind of useful case for us. Okay. So just to sum up those patterns in those data, we find this initial return just down about 40%, declines about half in the first decade of working life. It's really about computer science and engineering and not the other STEM fields. And as I said, most of the return to majoring in STEM is actually about working in STEM. We're not the first people to show this. The Kinsler at the bottom paper does the same thing. And it's really about the job. Okay, so what is it about the job? So the other thing we can do, so if you recall the kind of framework we laid out, the way we're going to test this first prediction about lower wage growth is we're going to estimate those models with the age by major interaction, except instead of major, we're going to directly use that skill change measure I calculated. So age times skill change, we're going to ask directly whether you earn relatively more in higher change jobs when you're young. Okay? And then we're also going to look at sorting by just taking the measure and regressing it on age to see if there are more young people in those jobs. Makes sense? Okay. So this is the first one. What we find is basically that all jobs, I should have showed you the figure that shows non-STEM and STEM together. You find the same pattern for both of them. That jobs that have higher rates of change pay more to younger people. the way to interpret this figure is to say it should be wages, not income. So it's saying at age 23, you earn about, if you are in a job that has a 1 standard deviation higher rate of change, you earn about 23% more when you're 23. 23% more than when you're 21% more than when you're 23, and about 12% more when you're 40. So the relative return is higher for young people in these jobs. And they also do pay more, the level of hiring they're doing. And then on the sorting side, we see the same thing, which is that these jobs have more young people in them. Right? So this is saying they have, if your job is 1 standard deviation higher in the skill change measure, the share of younger workers is about 0.15 percentage points higher compared to, sort of the 0 categories like age 31. Okay, so there's more young people in it. So it's kind of consistent with the story, and it's not just about STEM. And I guess the last kind of result I want to show you is this thing that I said was the least intuitive, which is about higher ability workers sorting out of technical fields over time. We have to use the NLSY to do this because we have measures of that. So the Armed Forces Qualifying Test, which is like a achievement test. So what do we find? So first thing, so this is, I'm going to show you some regressions with a bunch of interactions, and they're hard to interpret, so I'm going to interpret them for you in a second. Just focus on signs right now. This first column says that in this longitudinal sample, people who major in STEM, that's the STEM major indicator, are 35 percentage points more likely to work in a STEM job, if that makes sense. Right? And we're controlling for AFQT, so that what this means is if you have an AFQT score, an achievement score, that's 1 standard deviation higher than the average, you're about 8.4 percentage points more likely to work in a STEM job at age 23, because we scale this so that age 23 is 0, so it's relative to 23. Okay. And if your AFQT score is 0, there's no interaction, so you're always 8.4 percentage points more likely to work in a STEM job, because it's age times AFQT is age times 0 if the score is 0. If it's 1, meaning 1 standard deviation higher, then the probability of being in a STEM job declines by about 0.5 percentage point every year. Right? So if you think about it, if this is scaled to age 23, so by age 40, you multiply that times 17. 17 times 0.05 is 0.085. So what that means is by about age 40, the people in STEM jobs are no higher ability than the people. That you're no more likely to be in a STEM job if you're higher ability. Right? So this is showing that they're sorting out of STEM jobs over time for people who have higher average AFQT scores. Okay? So that's for the sorting. And then if you want to look at wages, these are very hard to interpret, but the thing I want to, they're linear projections, so I can tell you what the coefficients imply for different ages. But what I want you to focus on is that the first thing it shows you is that people who have higher test scores earn relatively more as they age. So this interaction between age and the test score is positive. This is basically like saying if you have higher ability, you're a faster learner, you're pulling away from people of lower ability. That's sort of what we thought. But you'll notice that the triple interaction, age times AFQT times STEM major, is strongly negative. So this relationship of pulling away from people is much less true for STEM majors and actually gets reversed. Okay, so how does this play out when you plug it in? It implies that if your test score is 1 standard deviation above the average, and you major in STEM, you earn about 21% more than a person with an average score at age 23. And you earn 40% more at age 35. So you are pulling away. But the non-STEM majors who also have AFQT score of 1 standard deviation above average only earn 2% more than people at the average at age 23. But they earn 39% more at age 35, so they're catching up. So you draw 2 lines, and one of them is catching up the other one, which is exactly what our story would predict. And because this is a linear model, it implies an earlier crossing point between the two for people of even higher ability. So basically, the higher your test score, the more you're going to earn relatively more in a non-STEM job relative to a STEM job. So that's just going to predict that people are going to switch out faster when they're higher ability. And I get one more thing. I can tell you, I have seen this in non-publicly available data where we can track very large samples of individuals in colleges over time. And I mean, that data is not public, but it was a sanity check for me. I can look at it and tell you that we see this pattern. Essentially what you see is that people who major in technical fields start off very high in the wage distribution, they stay there. But people who major in, let's say, political science or psychology start lower and just catch up. They're just catching up. So there's everybody who graduates from college is looking more similar as they age. Yeah?
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Yeah.
So I think this is going to make your results even stronger, probably, but certainly in that first column,
yeah.
If you want to know the returns to AFQT, you really should take the STEM major main effect out of it, because presumably AFQT is related and probably positively related to probability in a STEM major.
Yeah. I see.
Probably from the second one.
I see.
Column too.
Yeah.
My guess is it'll make your results stronger.
Right, I see what you're
But it
saying.
wouldn't have
It's
to.
related to it. Yeah. Yeah, it's good numbers. Yeah, I agree. I think we
probably
did that.
a
There's another column in the table that I didn't put here. We might have done. I don't remember now. Yeah, it's good. Yeah. Yeah.
It's probably a different paper, but I think college quality has a big role to play. And I mean, I think your point about humanities majors or English majors looking more like STEM majors, I'm guessing is empirically true for Harvard graduates and UVA graduates. I'm less certain that it is true for graduates of directional state. That's an empirical question, but.
Right, another way to say that is the variance of earnings with respect to college quality is probably much less for a technical. That's sort of what you're saying, right? Is like, you can still do well if you're majoring in a technical subject at a directional state school, but the relationship between college quality and major is different at these different institutes. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we don't really have much ability to tell that in these cases.
No, but I mean, I think there's a tendency, I mean, Carolyn's got this paper on this, which we can, but to either be in a camp of it's all college quality, which I think is probably wrong, or it's all college major.
Right, the truth is, as always, is somewhere between.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree, yeah. Okay, I have one more thing I want to show you guys, it's super quick. It's basically, you might think, well, is this just unique to the last decade? Or can we see examples of this in past periods? And we don't have burning glass data going back farther, but there's this really cool paper just accepted at the AJ Applied by Atzalai and co-authors, where they basically they find classified ads from old newspapers and digitize them and then parse them the way the burning glass does to try to look at job change going way farther back. And it's a really cool paper, you should read it. It's called The Evolution of Work in the United States, forthcoming in AJ Applied. And it's super cool, but what we basically use their data to see if we could detect this kind of stuff happening in the past. It's very hard to compare levels because the ads are totally different and so forth. But we can see basically, do we see higher relative wages for young people in STEM during periods that we know have rapid change? So we can measure the change and see if the labor market patterns line up. So that's what we did. So if you use their data, that's these bar charts here. We're measuring the rate of within occupation task change for 5-year periods. So this is the period 1973 to 78. The left-out category is 68 to 73. And then 78 to 83, 83 to 88, and so forth. We see is for non-STEM jobs, it's absolutely flat, right? Jobs are changing, but they're not changing at a particularly high rate during particular periods. But for STEM jobs, we see it really spikes here exactly in the kind of computer and information technology revolution. So this is when the personal computer was introduced. This is when a lot of office software really spread through the economy. We see that these jobs, the job change measures spike during these periods. And so our prediction would be that's a period where young people in STEM are going to earn relatively more because they have skills that are particularly new and relevant. Okay, and so then we go to the CPS data and try to look at that by comparing relative returns across periods for young STEM workers, old STEM workers, and then kind of everybody else. And we find is the variation in relative pay for older STEM workers is not that great across these periods. See, that's the gray bars. Right, this is relative, so it's not that they earn 0, it's that they're not earning much more than they were in previous periods. It's kind of constant. But you see that the return for young STEM workers is much more cyclical. Right, so it's really spiking in these periods, it's lower here in the 70s when there's less change. It spikes through the 80s, and then even though we don't have job change data during this period, this is kind of the dot-com boom and bust era. So we think maybe that's a measure too. So it's sort of, I mean, this is suggestive, but when you go back farther, this looks like a more general phenomenon than just the last decade. That's the main point of this. And there's more details in the paper if you want to see how the sausage got made on this. Okay, so summing up, we find, if you learn nothing else from today, I think I've shown you a set of facts about the labor market that at least I didn't know when I started the project, which is that people who major in these applied technical fields do very well when they graduate, but they have a lower return to experience and other college majors catch up to them. Okay, so that is just an important thing to know about the world. We argue, based on using the burning glass data, that the key mechanism is actually changes in the nature of the job itself. The jobs that change faster are going to have these flatter profiles for, I think, reasons that make good economic sense, and then we kind of show evidence that that's true. So this is, again, a collage of evidence that tries to tell a story together. Okay. Not a causal effect X on Y type paper. and that's okay. I can do that now. Okay, so as I said, like the main mechanism is that jobs with these higher rates of change, including STEM but not exclusively STEM jobs, are going to have flatter age earnings profiles. They employ younger workforces. That's all true. Okay. And then if you want to think about what does it mean, I want to think about what does it mean. I think it's a really nice parallel between us and the recent paper by Rick Hanushek and Ludwig Bussmann and colleagues, where they look at patterns of earnings profiles across countries that have different education systems. So in places like Germany and Switzerland, where they have very well-developed vocational training systems, you see that young people tend to do relatively well, but that their profiles are flatter. Whereas in a country like the US, where education is much more general and decentralized, you see the young people start off slower, but then catch up and actually exceed the earnings by sort of mid-career. And so that's kind of the same story. Ours is the within-country, across field of study version of their across-country result. So I think it's all consistent with this broad idea, which is that when you go to school, you learn some stuff that's quite specific to a trade or a field of study, and you learn some other things that are more general, and those are both really important. And that the specific stuff will help you get a good job, help you get into a career path, but it sometimes has a shelf life, and that it's not by itself the only return to education. That there is something general you're learning in school that is really important, that is transferable to a broad range of jobs. And if you're making a forward-looking decision, you're making an educational investment for a set of jobs that may not even exist yet. And so your learning has to be kind of future-proof. And that's important to remember as we design education systems. And then the last point I want to make is that actually this idea about the STEM shortage is wrapped up in technological change. Like we're going to feel this shortage more when change is faster. And change is a good thing. It means we're finding better, more efficient ways to perform job functions. But it also means we have more of an imperative to train people, to train the next generation, and then also to accommodate people who are displaced by this change. So it puts more pressure on the education system, even though it's a good thing overall. That's it. Thank you. Don't be in a rush to leave. It's pouring out.
Hey, Rivera.